Hey, so welcome to a new video. This may be a couple of parts, depending on how long it gets. But I want to talk about how to choose your first kanna, hiragana, which is a Japanese kind of flat smoothing plane. It doesn't have to be smoothing, but just generally means flat plane. So not something like a plow plane or a kind of a hollow or round or rabbit plane, that kind of stuff. So just a bog standard plane. I want to kind of make this guide as a sort of a rough guide for people in the Western world, the English-speaking world, to kind of help them identify maybe the kind of the traits or the kind of features of a kanna, which will maybe hopefully indicate that it's a good performer. This is not for collectors. Collectors' blades are a whole different story. This is purely for people who want to use these kanna as an actual tool. There's not much information out in the Western world, as I said, especially for the kind of the lesser known modern makers and also the older stuff. The new modern makers, the kind of the well known ones like Funahiro, Keizaburo, there's all these different makers, but they're the famous ones. They usually have quite a bit of information in the West, in English. So for the most part, I'll leave them alone because most of those are decent blades. But for the kind of older stuff, especially stuff that you find on auctions and things, and also the lesser known modern makers, I'll show you a few I'll give you a few tips on what to look for when you're buying a blade, so you know how much to either pay for it, bidding or otherwise, hopefully to get you a good tool. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is price. This is probably the kind of easiest thing for people to gauge a kanna on. It's not the best thing to decide how to buy a kanna, but it's one kind of measurement you can use. Now, I have here a selection of kanna which I've bought over the years, etc. But these kind of range from super cheap to mid-priced, kind of slightly on the high end for normal use kind of range. So I'll go through each of these. Now, first up, I have this super cheap kanna here. You can see it's kind of cheesy cardboard box. This cost me 1,800 yen on an auction. This is new old stock. I haven't opened it, but this is what it is. This, I think, kanna, this cost about maybe 10,000 to 15,000 yen if you bought it new back in the day. But I found this new old stock for 1,800 on Japanese auction. Standard cardboard box. The nicer kanna come in kiri boxes, which is a wooden box. Most Japanese kind of antiques, kind of more pricey stuff, they come in these handmade kind of kiri boxes, Polonia boxes, and they usually have a handwritten kind of script on them to kind of describe the contents. This one came in a cardboard box, so it's not particularly high quality, but it's actually not bad. The die is shirakashi. I'll get into the die material later in a little bit. The blade here is nice, and there's a nice chip breaker. Overall, this is quite a nice kanna. Now, for 1,800 yen, this is an absolute bargain. And I'm not sure in the West, but you might be able to kind of find stuff like this on auctions. If you look around, don't be afraid of stuff in cardboard boxes. Generally speaking, though, stuff in cardboard boxes like this, especially with the name of the kanna kind of stamped on in ink and not written or anything, these are generally the lower end kanna. You can expect, slightly lesser quality steel. The kind of maybe the fit in here is not so nice. The finish of the kanna blade is not so nice. Give me a second, I'll take it out. So, came with a bit of rust-proof paper between the uragane, this is called. This is the chip breaker, and the actual blade. It's stuck to the rust-proof paper, but you probably can't see this on camera, but this actually has a machine ground hollow in the back. That's one sign of slightly less quality. It doesn't actually make much difference in the performance. It's just a kind of finished thing, but nicer ones will have a hand finished, scraped finish there. But this is, yeah, very standard kanna. This is probably the lowest end I would recommend you buy, mainly because if you go any lower than this, your steel will usually be not so great. The blade fit in the die will also not be so good, so you'll need a lot of tuning. And also, very often, if you buy a very cheap kanna, the mouth opening here will be way too wide, and also the blade will be loose, or maybe, if you're lucky, tight. So generally, don't go too cheap. I think if you're buying new, 10,000 yen is a very good starter range. It's on the lowish end, but for a first kanna, and for if you're actually going to use this as an actual tool, then that's a perfectly fine price range. Now, stepping up a bit, this is a kind of a hybrid. The blade itself is new old stock. The die, which is the wooden block, this is I got this made when I bought the blade. So this is a brand new die, and this chip breaker I also brought separately, brand new. So this is a kind of a hybrid mix of parts. The blade itself costs, I think, 6,000 yen or something from a dealer, and the die costs, I think, about 4,000 something to make. The chip breaker was, I think, 1,500 yen or something. So for about just over 10,000 yen, maybe 12,000 or something, I got this kanna. This is also a nice performer. The die was made by Inamoto-san, who's quite a famous maker, especially in the West. Did a good job, and yeah, it's a good kanna. This is a very good way to go, because the blade, generally speaking, the blade is an important part, but as long as it's kind of half decent, you will get a good kanna out of it. The most important part is how it's set into the die, and how the die is tuned up, and how the blade is sharpened, obviously, but the tuning and everything is what makes a kanna perform well. So don't kind of be scared of really cheap blades or anything like that, because it's steel, it will cut wood, and as long as you set it up properly, it will do a fine job. So this is something you could expect slightly better than the cardboard box version over there. This is a slightly upper market. Stepping up again. Now this is again another kind of slightly hybrid. The blade set, which is the chip breaker and the actual blade, I got used. The die was again made new, so for this blade set, this is a new die, and this is a no-name die, which is not really a problem. It fits nicely. It's nicely made, clean cut, and this blade is Ishido Hyun. Ishido is a very famous maker. They make very good blades, and I got this for, I think the blade I got for 15,000. 15,000, I think? 15,000 yen, yeah. 15,000 yen for the blade and the chip breaker. It's a used blade, so it's not in the best of condition. You can see, I haven't actually fit this yet, but you can see where the guy was kind of scraping the bit there, and it's at the feet. Very standard chip breaker, and you can see it's slightly shorter. It's been used, and it's not in the best condition, as in there's a few, filing marks here, etc. But this is a very good option to go. Used blades are very often, especially from the well-known makers, they're very often much cheaper, obviously, than the new. And a new Ishido Hyun like this would cost something like the higher end of the 20,000, maybe 30,000 yen range. By the way, kind of conversions to dollars, I guess, 10,000 yen is about $120, $130 maybe. I'm not particularly sure about this, but so the first paper box plane, that's about 120. So 1,800 yen. That's about what, $30, $40 or something. But new, that would have cost maybe 120 odd. This one here with the new old stock blade and the new die, this one probably is something equivalent of about $150, something like that. This one is maybe approaching $200, but this is a very good blade. The Hyun is, so 30,000, that's probably about $400 something in US money. So this is a good option because you get a good blade, a nice new die, and you know, it'll perform very nicely. Now, the other option is to buy completely used, and this is something I got off an auction again. You know, very rough condition. You can see it's actually not too bad, but this will need a little bit of cleanup before you actually use it. This costs 14,000, mainly because the blade is a very nice blade. This is one made by I can't remember what his name is pronounced as, but it's Ryu Shinsai. I think it's like, no, I can't remember what his name is, but he's a very famous Tokyo blade maker. And again, this is used, and actually, this is something interesting. You can see the die here is very beat up. It's got some paper here, padding to tighten up the fit. Generally speaking, the die in a used plane is probably the best thing to do is just to recut a new one, unless it's in a nice condition and you feel like restoring. But something like this, I would just store away for you to use for offcuts, for kind of filling in the mouth, and just kind of cut a new one basically. So what I wanted to show you was the blade. Now you can see the blade, and it's got this much steel left, which is a nice amount. Now I just so happen to have the same blade make. This costs 2,000 yen. It's the same blade. You can see the die is just completely crap. You can't use this really. But it's the same blade, and this costs 2,000 yen. This is, $30, $40 something. The other one was 140, probably about $200 maybe, approaching something like that. But you can see, just because this came in a crappier die, the chip breaker is exactly the same. They both have the same stamp on them, but you can see the steel is much shorter. These two are exactly the same kind of make of blade, but this one is way shorter. Also, the kind of finish here is bad, but I'll get into this a bit later. But because of this difference in kind of steel length and how much they've been used, this blade is, about 5 times cheaper. So it's a really good bargain. You can still use this. There's plenty of steel left here. This will last you a good few years, even of hardcore use. Probably 10-20 years, I'd say. Whereas this is probably going to last me a lifetime. I'll never get to the end of this, I don't think, in my use. But so looking for short blades like this, and fitting the die yourself, is a very good way to go if you want a good blade at a bargain price. Let's put this back. Now, another choice you have is to buy kind of fully new, and that's what I did here. And it's this blade. This is my most expensive plane I have, and it's not particularly expensive. It costs 23,000, so that's 300 and something dollars. And this is a Keizaburo. This is his first, after he became an independent blacksmith from his tutor. This is the first kind of series of plane blades he made. It's called Mu, and this is kind of new old stock, I guess you'd call it. but it's basically new. The die here, obviously cut new. A nice chip breaker, very cleanly made. See the back there. I'll get into the chip breakers later, in a little bit later, but you can see the blade here, very nice blade. And Keizabu is a very famous maker. He's probably one of the most kind of famous makers now, one of the most popular, especially for the kind of competitions and stuff. He makes very good blades, and he's very young. I think he's still in his 20s, so he's kind of a new generation, and this is kind of something you can expect to be on the higher end of the scale of what you'd want to buy as a first kanna. It's not probably going to perform any better than say like the Ishido or whatever, but just because of the name and stuff, and because it's new, you pay that extra kind of premium. It's, there's no real reason to get anything like this unless you really want to, but this is kind of top end of what I would recommend. Any more expensive than this, and when you actually, because it's your first kanna, if you don't know how to tune it up and stuff, you could risk screwing it up and you basically ruined a high quality plane. So go for something slightly kind of lower end of the market, say 10,000 to 20,000 yen. So that's 150 to maybe, I guess, $300. That's the kind of range you'd really want to be looking at. As I said, for the used as well, this is a very good way to go, because obviously it's used, and if it's in bad condition, you won't have any kind of worries about screwing it up any further, because it's probably pretty screwed up like this. I'll actually do another video on how to kind of tune and kind of clean these things up, but these are a very good way to practice tuning kanna up, also making a new die as well. So I'd recommend an old kanna as well. Obviously you have to be careful when you're going on auctions, and that's what the kind of rest of this video is going to be about, how to kind of spot those bargains, as it were. So this is the kind of rough price range you want to be looking at as a first kanna. Okay, so the next thing you'd really want to look at is steels. The blade is the most important part of the kanna, because the die, the body, it can be recut by yourself, and typically you'd go through, there's an old saying that you'd go through 10 die for the life of one blade. So you can see that the blade is by far the most important part when you're actually buying a kanna. Now, the steel is the kind of the thing that sets blades apart, because that's what actually does the cutting. And there's two large groups of steel, well actually three. The first group is the simple high carbon steels, things like white paper steel, standard Swedish steel. They are reputed to hold a finer edge, as in they basically get sharper, but they don't hold that sharpness for as long as the other steels. These are good for things like softwoods. Traditionally they're recommended for softwoods, and the Japanese actually like them more for planing softwoods because they give a nicer sheen, apparently. So that's one choice. The second choice you have is your high carbon alloyed steels, which is stuff like blue paper steel. There's other kind of special steels like Toho steel, Tsubame steel. There's all these different ones, but they're basically all bunched under the high carbon alloyed steel. They have added chromium and tungsten content, and that makes the grain structure of the steel slightly coarser. That in turn kind of dictates the sharpness. Generally speaking, the blue steels, the alloyed steels, they don't have as fine an edge as the white steels, the high carbon steels, and but they hold it longer. So they're good for things like medium woods. They'll also work for softwoods and also hardwoods. They're a good middle ground between the steels. This is all kind of generalities. Each blacksmith has their own way of forging and stuff, and some can, pull out properties of the white steel to make it, longer lasting. like the blue steels, but still have that fine edge, etc. So it all depends on the blacksmith, but this is a kind of general talk between steels. The third group is the special steels, the high-speed steels, etc. There's powdered high-speed steels, there's standard high-speed steels and stuff. These are generally regarded best for the really hard woods. Things like bubinga, ebony, maybe rosewoods and things, and the more abrasive woods. They generally don't hold as fine an edge as the other steels, but again, they last longer. So there's these three kind of categories. Now, there's all these different names, like each blacksmith has their own different names for each of these steels, and like, you know, some didn't even disclose them. So there's a lot of confusion about which one you should choose. And generally, as a first steel, I would recommend you choose a blue steel, standard blue paper steel, plainly because just about every blacksmith knows how to forge it. It's the standard steel. It works for a wide range of woods, you know, from the soft woods all the way up to the hard woods. You know, you really can't go wrong with it, and it's also very common to get, cheap, and it's also probably the first steel you'll see in the lower end kind of range of planes. The really cheap planes, they have just plain tool steel. It's not even a named brand steel. It's just bulk standard carbon steel. Then the next kind of step above that is the blue paper steels, and then you can get, you know, more and more exotic. But you know, blue paper is a good first choice. I think most of these blades, the Ishido, for example, I showed you earlier. The Ishido Hyun here, this has a blue paper steel blade. Works just fine. I'm pretty sure, but not absolutely certain, that this Keizaburo also has blue paper steel. So from, you know, even these slightly higher level planes, they have blue paper steel blades, and they work just fine. And as I said, it's up to the blacksmith really, how he kind of forges, heat treats, etc. To put out these different properties of steels. So even if two blacksmiths use exactly the same steel, they will have different properties because, you know, depending on how they forge it, etc. So, you know, since there's so much choice out there, all these blacksmiths, and especially the old blades, you have no idea what they use. Obviously for those, you have no choice but to just buy the blade, but for the newer kind of blades, look for a blue steel as a first blade, as it's a good all-round steel. Now, the backing steel is the kind of the second component of the main blade, and its importance is in it being soft. It helps, basically, the softer it is, the easier it is to sharpen your blade, because these two are laminated together. If you had that whole kind of blade as, for example here, if you have this whole surface here as hard steel, it would be very hard to abrade. So they laminate it, and so you have most of this being soft steel, and there's only this thin kind of lamination of cutting steel for you to abrade away when you sharpen it. So when you're looking for a blade new, there's two kind of categories you should be aware of. The first category is the modern stuff, and the second is vintage. So the modern stuff is basically translated as extremely soft steel. It's, you know, modern, it's soft, but it's not as soft as the vintage stuff, so it's less desirable. The kind of defining characteristic of it is, if you look at the actual backing iron part of the bevel, you'll see it's all a very uniform, flat grey. That kind of indicates that it's a modern steel. The vintage stuff has these black flecks on it, which I'll give you a close-up of in a minute. You know, they're the two kind of defining properties. The soft modern kind of steel iron is not bad. This is what you'd find in the kind of the cheaper end of the planes, maybe 10,000 yen range, that kind of price range. It's basically only used in the lower end stuff. Now the vintage stuff, it's you know, softer than the modern, and it comes in a variety of names: kamaji, namaji, rentetsu, watetsu. There's all these different names, but basically they all refer to this vintage, soft iron. This stuff was made, way back 1800s, 1900s, or whatever, and it's not produced anymore. So it's becoming rarer and rarer as the years go on. This is the ideal backing iron because it's soft, and this is usually found in planes maybe ranging from 15,000 and up. Obviously the more expensive you get, the better the quality. But kind of the things you should look out for are, as I said, those black spots, and also these kind of lamination, not lamination, but kind of striations in the steel. And I'll give you a close-up of that now. Now for the backing iron here, you can see this is vintage stuff. This is my Keizaburo blade, and you can see there's these kind of black spots speckled in the backing iron here. These are, I think, carbon deposits or something. Basically this is a sign that it's a good, soft backing iron, vintage stuff. The new stuff don't have these black spots. Here's another sample of a backing iron. This is from an Ishido Teruhide blade, and you can see this has also got these black spots, and it's got these few striations here. You can see these kind of lines, like kind of strata in the backing iron. That's it's not such a great thing. According to Yamamoto-san, who's the blacksmith for the Horaku line of planes, he says these kind of laminations are an indication of slightly lower quality backing steel. It's because there's these striations appear because there's different layers of hardness in the backing steel. If this is all uniformly soft, then this would all be a uniform kind of color. But it's just the same reason you can see this lamination line for the cutting steel and the backing blade, backing steel here. It's because steels have two different properties, and those two properties show up as different light reflecting properties in the steel here. So you can see these striations are something not to be avoided, but it's a slight indication of slightly lesser quality backing iron. So keep an eye out for that as well. Okay, so here are a few samples of chip breakers, or uragane, and range from the kind of most simple here to slightly upper class here. And this is a kind of one which I'll get to in a minute. But so going from this simple one here, this is basically a sheet of steel which has been bent in the corners to form these mimi, as they're called, and one end sharpened to a kind of a blade. This is the simplest style you'll find. I don't think this is even laminated, and this is basically only used on the cheapest of the cheap planes. Stepping up a bit, this is one I found bought for I think about 1,500 yen, aftermarket. You can see it's thicker compared to the cheesy one. See it's thicker there. This one's laminated. You can see it's finished nicer, and the mimi here are also kind of sort of bent, but they're much thicker. And there's a nice hollow there in the back, nicely finished. And this is probably something you'd find in a very average quality plane, something like 10,000 yen, maybe up to even 15,000 yen kind of mark. Now this is the chip breaker I got in my Ishido plane. This is laminated as well. This is also relatively thick, slightly thinner than this one, but it's very similar in its construction quality. There's a hollow here, laminated. Not the best quality, it doesn't look, but it does its job. And this is the kind of chip breaker I got with an Ishido, so this can't be too bad. Now, the best chip breaker I have, in my opinion, is the one that came with my Keizaburo, and this you see is similar in thickness and quality to the other two I just showed, but this has much crisper lines. This is also very thick, laminated again, a nice smooth finish, a nice black hollow here, which is a nice added touch. But you see the mimi here are actually curved. They aren't hammered. They're kind of forged to be that kind of thickness, and they're very smooth, and it's very nicely finished compared to, let's say, this one. You can see some very definite crease marks here, whereas this is a very nice smooth curve. Slightly higher market, upper market, this one. And another kind of indication of quality of a blade or blade set is if the chip breaker has the maker's stamp which matches the blade. It's called a matching set or a matching breaker, tomo osae, and usually you should get a matching stamp or seal to indicate that they were set, and usually, not always, it indicates a better quality chip breaker and blade. This one was the one that came with my 2,000 yen special here. This mark is this for this plane, and yeah, you can see it's not such a great chip breaker. It's kind of a mid between this cheesy piece of steel and a slightly better version, but at least it's laminated. It's kind of chunky, but this is kind of a sampling of the chip breakers you should expect to see.